shortly.
Well, why don't we start with introductions? Welcome everyone to the Program and Grants Committee meeting, and then by the time that we get through, Pat may be here. So I'll start with you, Brendan. You're in my corner.
Hi, Brendan O'Neill with the Maine Attorney General's Office. And my colleague Katrina Bonish asked me to introduce her because she lost her voice, although she's healthy and is otherwise recovering. And behind her, because they're far from the microphone, is Grayson Havens, all from the Attorney General's Office.
Great, thank you. Gordon.
Gordon Smith, the state's director of opioid response in Governor Mills' office. Thank you.
Thank you. Todd.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Todd Brackett. I'm the sheriff in Lincoln County.
Great. Paul.
Good afternoon. I'm Paul Vinsel. I'm an addiction medicine physician for Spurwink.
Great. Mary.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mary Coyne. I'm the ED of the council.
Tess.
Can you guys hear me now? Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm on my phone. I'm like so bad at doing calls in the car. My name is Tess Parks. I am the policy director of Maine Recovery Action Project. And though a member of the council, I'm not a member of the Grants and Programs Committee, but I always like to attend to, hear perspectives and stay in the loop.
Thank you, Tess. Melissa, welcome. We're just doing introductions.
Thanks, Joe, and apologies. I always forget that when I try to join by the Zoom link I get, it doesn't work. So I got to go to the regular one and get promoted. Anyway, my name is Melissa Hackett. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm here representing the Maine Child Welfare Action Network, which I serve as the coordinator for.
Excellent. And I think I got everyone. I'm Joe Everett, the president and CEO of the Opportunity Alliance, a member of the council, and I chair this wonderful committee. So, Mary, I think I'll turn it right over to you for the contract updates.
Yes, I have a couple of kind of brief contract updates to provide. Not too much, but that's a good thing. Things are moving forward. Over the past 2 weeks, in particular, I've been working with the Attorney General's office to determine the timeline for our contracts. And as we discussed at our last meeting, we're working right now to develop the Rider A's, and we'll be working on those this month as well as April. And then we'll be sending the finalized contracts with signatures over to the AG's office in 2 batches. And so for those, we're looking at May start dates and May payment dates, and then June start dates as well as June payment dates. We are right now working through some questions in regards to sort of payment processes and logistical, not issues, but obstacles, I guess, over this summer with the change of the fiscal year. As I mentioned, the financial orders are something that the state has to do when it is looking to encumber funds. And that's also something that we are subject to, given that our funding lives within the Attorney General's office. So right now we're working to determine what type of contracting can take place at the beginning of July. And any contracts that remain or that we aren't able to push through in that May and June timeframe, we will make sure to wrap up as soon as we're able and get those off to the Attorney General's office for them to finalize that process with us towards the end of the summer. Again, I don't think that will be the case for many of them, but we've been working through contingency plans and just making sure that we're all on the same page about what those timelines look like. After our discussions, I'm excited to share that Barry Dunn has been onboarded essentially, and their contract is close to being finalized. So we'll have them begin working with us in the next week and a half or so, and they'll be able to start supporting our contracting process, which will help things move along at a quicker pace than we've been able to, and at least give us one additional level of support. We will also have a coordinator, the new coordinator coming on starting on Monday. And so she will be joining us and also helping to draft those deliverables. After, discussing this process and kind of how we'll balance all the different needs and timelines and stakeholders, I think it actually will be best not to have the council as involved in drafting the deliverables. I know we'd mentioned that at our last full council meeting, but based on sort of the new information I have and my updated understanding of the process, I think it'll be more efficient for us to work internally with the council staffing as well as the Attorney General's office with the additional support of Barry Dunn. And that way we can keep those moving forward. I will still probably ask a couple of you for drafting support or you to provide some advice and guidance on more of like a subject matter expert level. But in general, we won't be kind of going through that process of involving the council in the day-to-day of this, which I hope is a nice relief for everyone that we'll be able to move forward again without having to all be drafting deliverables for these contracts. I've been working with a couple grantees who had questions at our last meeting to make sure to follow up and provide clarity around some of the questions they had with the provisions and standard contract language. And those conversations have been going well. Brendan and the Attorney General's office have also been supporting those discussions and are helping us to move forward with developing the individual templates and contracts really for each of these 45 projects. And so things are moving forward, which I'm happy to report. The majority of my work over the past month and will continue to be the majority of my work for the next 2 months is working on these contracts. And I'll continue to be involved in both the actual drafting of the deliverables along with the negotiations and making sure that we can get those contracts signed and over to the Attorney General for his signature and the final steps of the process. Any questions about that?
I don't know, Mary, if you covered kind of the timeline when we think we will get sort of the 43-ish. Just can you remind the group?
Yeah, so
I mean, back of the napkin too. I mean, I know it's a bit of a crystal ball, but just for the good of the group.
yeah, so I've been trying to play around with the numbers and the timeline, recognizing that we understand what steps need to take place in the process, but we also have never tried to complete 45 contracts in a short period of time. And so we will learn lessons along the way and we'll have to adjust and be flexible as these conversations unfold. But my hope right now and what I'm planning for, and this is very much back of the napkin, just my thoughts, is we'll have 3 groups of contracts. We'll have Group A, and those are the contracts that we are beginning to work on now. I'm hoping to have about 30 contracts in Group A, or excuse me, 20 contracts in Group A. And those will tentatively have a start date of May 1st with May 2nd, excuse me, and a payment date towards the middle or end of May. Then we'll have another set of contracts, Group B, and there'll be about 10 contracts in that bunch. And those will have a beginning of June start date and middle to end of June payment date. And then any remaining contracts that require additional development work or more extensive negotiation, clarity around the contracting terms and whatnot, those will be in our last group. And we won't work on those last, but we just are accounting for the fact that there will be some contracts that are more complex than others. And those will likely have a start date closer to the end of August or September with payment a couple weeks after that. Again, we're going to do everything we can to get the majority of contracts finalized at the very least for that June 30th payment date. But we're working under, pretty tight staffing and limited staffing, as well as many different deadlines and constraints. So that is the tentative plan right now. And again, that may change and be updated as new information unfolds, but that's my plan as of the last couple days.
That's great. Thanks. Gordon, then Todd, then Pat.
Thanks, Joe. Mary, two questions. The contracts from last year, will they automatically go into Group A, or will they be actually finished up in a process prior to the new contracts? And
Though,
go ahead, and then I'll ask my second question. Sorry.
okay, that's a great question. They're not in the Group A, B, and C sort of assignments that I've just detailed out to all of you, but they are still the top priority. And all of those are in the process of being developed and drafted. Most of them are close to being finalized. So we will keep the timelines in mind when we're moving through those, but those will be finished sort of first and foremost, and those have been my focus over the past 2 weeks.
And my second question is whether the council will actually vote on what's in Group A, B, and C.
The council would have that opportunity if the committee would like to do that. I'm open to it. My, initial hesitation in doing that is if we have to wait until the full council meeting next week to finalize those groups, that also holds up drafting, and some of them have already been started based on a number of factors. Truly, it's the contracts where they are less complex and they are more or less sort of standard projects. Those we've been able to begin moving forward on, and there are a couple groups of contracts, sort of contract types that we've identified. And Gordon, I know you were involved in that. And so there are a handful of contracts where once we develop the deliverables for one, we put ourselves in a pretty good position for 3 or 4 more after that. Let's say for recovery centers, low barrier shelters, recovery residences, just to name a couple. So that's been something I've kept in mind. Again, moving through this process as efficiently as we can, and also taking into consideration funding constraints for each of these individual organizations, knowing none should be prioritized over another, but that each, has a unique situation and circumstance. And I've also taken that into account when I think about the priority list.
Okay, thanks.
Mary, I think you just inadvertently answered my question, but in general terms, does this kind of pave the way, make it a little bit simpler next time around, our next go around of funding as far as contracts go? I mean, and that's going to change, right? Unique projects obviously are going to require a unique contract, I think is what I just heard you say.
Yes, but to answer your question, it will make it easier. I mean, the fact that we have a standard contract template developed is a huge first step, and that will serve the council for years to come, and most certainly for future funding processes. And what we're doing now as well is developing more subject-specific templates, so that again, we'll have a Maine Recovery Council contract template for projects related to recovery centers and recovery support, recovery residences, and those, and we can have those to pull from moving forward.
And I apologize for being late. I don't have an IT department in my house. Um, so the computer wasn't my friend today. I didn't know if Mary shared with you that when we have somewhat of a plan cemented in place, that we will be reaching out to all the grantees to make sure that they understand that timeline, and moving forward and communicating as much as we can with them. But again, it seems like every time we have a plan, someone throws another wrench in that toolbox, and so we have to. And I think in the long range of this, to sort of answer Todd's question, in the long range, there are some things that as a council, once we get this sort of wrapped up in 6 or 7 months, we have a longer conversation to look at some of the roadblocks that we ran into this time and some ways to avoid them next time. And that may be a little bit more complicated than it sounds, but we've run into some issues that are not the council's. It's just the way the statute was written and the way the funding flows, which is sort of stopped, which is sort of slowed the process. Hasn't stopped it, sort of slowed it down. And Mary's done a wonderful job at negotiating what we needed to do to get this far. But again, I don't know if Mary said that or not, but we will make every attempt to make sure that the grantees have some idea when their contracts can be expected, so that they can advance plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. And I will also note that, it's been really helpful, again, to be able to have these conversations very openly and candidly with the Attorney General's office, and to recognize what they need to help partner with us in moving these contracts through. And from both standpoints, being able to group these 45 projects into smaller groups so that it's easier for all of us to understand what the internal deadlines look like, which ones to get started on. And for the Attorney General's office not to be handed 45 contracts to then have to process all at the same time. We're working together to make sure this is as doable as it can be for all of us, and that we're helping to spread out the workload to the best of our ability. Well, again, over the past week or so, I've learned more about this process. So by the council meeting, I'll be able to better articulate these timelines and have it all laid out a little bit better for you all to understand, and as well for our grantees. But I do want to, go back to Gordon's question and acknowledge that if the council would like to vote on the groupings, I'm certainly happy to prepare the documents for that to occur, and can get started to the extent possible in the meantime. But just want to put that out there that if the committee recommends we have a formal vote, I'm happy to do that.
It seems like you have your arms around it, Mary.
Then we'll keep moving forward
And
as is.
let's not add
Sounds good.
more bureaucracy maybe to.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, maybe for good reason. So I wanted to throw it out there, but yeah, I appreciate the trust and willingness to let us continue moving forward.
She based it on what she learned by surveying all the grantees.
Yeah.
Yeah, and looking at all the projects. And again, I'll be sure to communicate with grantees if it does, if we have identified any potential issues or delays that may draw out their contracting process. I'll make sure to have those conversations with them within the next week or two, so that they can adjust their expectations accordingly. And we can also gather more information that could potentially help us move those contracts forward sooner than we may be expecting or anticipating right now. Those are again, the kind of primary updates I wanted to share with you all. Again, the good news is we're still looking at those May and June payment dates as our focus, and we can move forward with those as planned. I do want to acknowledge that there's been, and we will talk about this later on, but for other funding opportunities, I know we've been talking about other potential policies to enact, that if we do approve any additional funding, we will continue to prioritize these contracts. And I also want to acknowledge that it may not be possible for us to actually begin any contracts or, again, encumber any funds between the start of the state fiscal year and when a financial order is authorized through the state. And that would be around, again, mid-August, I believe. So we would have a bit of a, for lack of a better term, a sort of blackout window there, that if we were thinking of any funding opportunities, the actual contracting and payment date would be pushed out maybe a little bit later than we were expecting. But that said, we've also, it takes us time to do these contracts, and quick turnaround for payments is not really our area of expertise. So just something to keep in mind. Again, wanting to share that information with you all as I learn it and as it becomes more apparent in our contracting process. That moving forward, we're still looking at, at least a few months with any sort of additional funding that may come our way.
Great. Any questions about contracts before? Okay, we have a few new members. I'm going to give some time for people to introduce themselves. So I'll start with you, Pat, as we move into the next
Good
section.
afternoon. I'm Pat Kimball. I'm a recovery advocate, and I am the chair of the Maine Recovery Council. And again, apologize. Computers are not my friend, but I figured it out, so I'm here. Thank you.
Great.
You're
Bruce.
welcome, guests.
I apologize for being late. Bruce Nodden, Maine Reentry Network, person in long-term recovery and person who lives with mental health challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Chastity.
Hi everyone, Chastity Toole. I use she, her pronouns and a harm reductionist in rural Maine. Also apologize for being late, but now I don't feel so bad that I was since multiple were. And I'll be off camera while I do notes.
And Liz.
Hi, Liz Blackwell Moore, she, her pronouns, and I'm the director of Cumberland County Public Health.
And Liz, I will pass it to you to do a prevention update, and maybe Melissa, whomever you want to add to the conversation.
Great. So we thought it would be nice to have some time today. I know we had a lot of, speakers, and we provided you with a proposal during the council meeting. And we thought it'd be nice just to have a little bit of time today to see if folks have additional questions. I think what I might do is have you, I think, pull up our proposal. Maybe I'll send it again. So it was the formal prevention proposal to the MRC that was sent out last week. The other things I sent you were the PowerPoints that were given during the presentation at the full council meeting. So if anybody needs it sent directly to them, feel free to let me know. And I guess I just wanted to, I don't know if people need a reiteration. I think one of the main things that may be slightly different in here that I do want to say is that we still haven't gotten a finance committee. We haven't had finance committee give us an update like on what we've spent and what we have and what we're looking at. I think Melissa and I, though, would strongly advise that we use the funding that we set aside for prevention from last year and whatever funding we set aside for this year to fund these projects, because, I think we did this prevention work group process that took 6 months to really figure out what are there's a lot going on in prevention and there's a lot of gaps. And so the prevention work group really worked through what are the priorities, and knowing that those priorities are going to take a while to meet those priorities and meet the goals that were outlined. We're recommending that we spend both chunks of money that are set aside for prevention on to meet these goals. So that's really the only addition that we added in here. I think we sort of said that during the meeting that we thought we should spend. We gave you kind of percentages of the prevention amount that was allocated, but assuming it's 4 million from last year and 4 million from this year, which I don't know if it is, maybe it's 3 million from this year. We gave you assumptions based on that in terms of our recommendations for funding. So I think mostly we just wanted to open it up for questions and for things that people are thinking about that we could perhaps address or figure out how to address before we get to a full council meeting. Melissa, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I just want to underscore what you shared about the amount of time and energy that's gone into developing these priorities, and that prevention takes time. So the recommendation around allocating around the 2 years just being a recognition of how much time and energy it takes to, as we've all just been talking about, get the money out the door, and really wanting to just streamline that in terms of efficiency. So just wanted to underscore that recommendation.
Pat.
Yeah, could you take just a few minutes either? First of all, thank you and Melissa both for this. It's amazingly well put together, and thank you. The part that I'm sort of struggling is the position within the CDC and how that sort of lays out um and exactly how that works. There's a section and I'm trying to pull it up. As I said,
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
not. Yeah, if you could just go into a little bit in more detail, because I'm a little unsure as to how that works.
Okay, sure.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the last goal. So that's the goal of increasing prevention efforts that really are focused on the 18 to 25-year-old population. So I think what we're proposing is essentially that we contract with the state Maine CDC as we would kind of any other organization that we're contracting with, and that we would contract with them to do the work of increasing prevention efforts for 18 to 25-year-olds. And that what they would do in the first year is do some hiring a person that could be doing the assessment work and really understanding where are there efforts that are kind of already underway under the Maine Prevention Network that could build and increase their capacity at the local level. Because there's like a small amount of stuff happening, but there's not any additional funding to make that work uh, bigger and really grow the focus on 18 to 25-year-olds. So what we're suggesting is that they have funding to hire a person and give out funds to local NPN with an understanding. They already know kind of what are the needs. And so essentially we would have a contract with them to do the work over a period of time. And we're suggesting it's a 3-year period of time, but that you give them the amount of money that we allocate would be determined up front. So they wouldn't get more money, after. It's not like they would get more money for that third year. It's that we would say to them, you have X amount of money, $2 million to spend over 3 years to do this work of understanding what the prevention efforts need to be, having a person that's able to do that work at the state level and support local level efforts. And I think the purpose of having a state level worker is that they also can be writing for federal grants that help them get and have money for sustainability. Because there are federal grants, but for some of this 18 to 25-year-old work, but it's really hard. You need to have the capacity to write the grants to then have it sustained. So the state in the past has had money to do 18 to 25-year-old work, but has since, doesn't have it anymore, and is kind of like piecemealing stuff together to do that work. But they are the most poised and well positioned organization to really do the focused work on the 18 to 25-year-olds.
So you would pay their salary, and the CDC would hire them, and then they have some money that's Maine Recovery Council funds. So
They would have
those
a contract, Pat, much like we have a contract with TOA to do something, or a
so
contract.
see this those the CDC, we would be contracting with the CDC to use those funds.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I see it much like, yes, they're a state entity, but I see it as us doing a contract just like we do with all the other organizations or entities that we are contracting with. So we would really clearly outline what are the goals, what's the work, what are they spending the money on? They would supply us with a budget. Like it would all be like very much like we already do. It's just that we would be saying it's almost like a sole source with an organization, but they would then do applications to the local entities to do some of the local work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Chastity.
I don't think this is actually a question. It's kind of my understanding on something and trying to clarify.
Sure.
First, I love that you guys did it, and I kind of wish that in all the pillars we had like the experts in that pillar be able to do this because I think it's really meaningful to hear from the people who know best in each area. Um, on the budget piece, and I could be remembering wrong, I don't know that besides the original 4 million that we said we were going to set aside like a certain amount per pillar. It was just like how Ben made it look over the next 18 years. So I think we would need to decide how much from whatever we have would be set aside for prevention. Um, and I just want to make sure I was right on thinking that. But other than that, I actually really like all of it, and the multi-year grants, as long as we aren't tying the hands of the next council, I also really like
Yeah.
because that doesn't happen as much as it really should in this work, and especially at this time when everything is so unknown. It's really, really important.
Thanks. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying like, so my understanding was for sure we set aside 4 million from 2024. And I guess are you saying like 2025? We just don't know. We haven't said whether we're
Yeah, I
setting.
don't think that we did, because I
Yeah.
think we just did that like as a one-time thing. So that would need to be established of how we're breaking up whatever 25's money is
Uh-huh. Yep.
first.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that's true. And maybe we want to, I think now that you're saying that, I'm like, yeah, you're right. We really didn't establish that. I was like thinking we were doing that, but you're right. We hadn't established that. And so perhaps we can start moving in the direction of what the work would be and keep going without necessarily putting exact amounts or doing the 2025 amount. And then when we just, or 2024, and then when we decide on what we want to do with 2025, we could then allocate it to the work that's already happening if we wanted to do it that way. So we don't hold it up to that vote. Might be how we do it.
so. I would suggest that we look at the motion because I was under the understanding that this money that was set aside was for 2 years, not 1 year. So the 4 million was in each pillar was for the 2 year cycle of this grant. It wasn't for one for the next. I could be mistaken. So I think it's easy enough if we just pull the motion and then we'll know what we decided.
I just want to
I
add on
think
that.
yeah, I
I
agree
thought
with
it was the last 2 years,
right,
not
that the last, right, it's not this coming 2 years. I think I was saying that if we were setting aside any money for prevention this year that we're in now, that we should add that to this amount, that we shouldn't try to do a new thing with prevention. Like we should do it with this. So I agree with you, Pat. I think it does say it's just 4 million that we had allocated from the last 2 years. That just like all the other pillars. Todd.
A generic question, I think, and just an observation or one maybe more of an observation than a question, but I can't remember, Liz, in your presentation, would you have some of that money in your plan to try to set aside for new initiatives that come forward in that time frame, or would you be looking differently, kind of like we've left some new initiative money aside in the budget, or would you just draw from that? And then I just I wonder about I don't, I don't disagree with any of it, but I wonder about the perception of treating grants in this pillar differently than ones that we've just sending out and treating in other pillars. I don't think that's insurmountable. I just think that's a question or something we're going to run into.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe I'll just take your first question, Melissa, or Melissa, go ahead. Why don't you respond?
Take the first question because I was just going to ask a follow-up on the second question. So,
I think your first, well, now I was thinking about the second question. The first one was about money. Oh, so, right? Wait, now tell me again what the question was.
Yeah,
I'm like,
no, it's
lost.
just quickly, and if what's your plan for new
Oh,
initiatives that may
right, new
prop up?
initiatives. Right. Okay. So I think for sure we want the 4 million that was already allocated to prevention that didn't go into the first round of RFPs. We want that 4 million to fully go to this. I think then there's this question about what happens to any future prevention funds. We were suggesting it should go to this as well, but perhaps that seems like it's a conversation that needs to continue to happen. Like what happens with future prevention funding. And so maybe there are some that set aside. I think prevention isn't usually in an emergency. Like it's like you're doing it ahead of time so you know what you're planning for like, and we've really outlined what are the needs. Although at this time period when funding is sort of unclear, we may want to have a little bit of funds set aside for emergencies, which may be when if the federal funding for prevention gets cut and we want to do some holdover for that. So, I mean, I think that's a great conversation. So again, last year's money that was already allocated, 4 million, we would propose that it all goes to this. And then let's have another conversation about 2025 funds. But thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and Todd, I just wonder if you could elaborate on the second point that you're making, because I think it's been brought up before of like the sense that we're requesting that the prevention funds be treated differently. And I just would like more clarification about what about this proposal feels different, especially as somebody who wasn't here for the last round of funding. Like, what about our proposal maybe feels different than the other pillars?
So, and again, it's not meant to be a criticism, just a question more than anything, or an observation, and that is that, I mean, you folks have done a lot of work on this, right? And your presentation seems pretty narrowly focused in three specific areas. It's not really narrow, but you know what I mean. And I think the biggest thing that jumps out at me, Melissa, is your request in each of your proposals there to go into that third year of funding. You know what I mean? Which is something we've talked about in the past, and I'm not opposed to it. I just wonder how the question's going to come up, and what discussion we have had or will have about that in the future. That's all.
That's super helpful, Todd. And I didn't take it as anything other than just a question, and appreciate you elaborating on that. And I think we could certainly give some thought to 2 years or 3 years, or what the implications are of spreading out the funding over a longer period of time for these funds versus other funds. And just appreciate you naming that. I would say too, to the fact that we got down to 3 strategy recommendations was not where we started, right? We had a longer list, and then we spent a lot of time with the work group members saying we really wanted to have a discrete number of things that we could fund with this work to really be able to best amplify those different strategies. So there was a lot of work to take a number of recommendations and say, can we capture these in 3 different strategies?
And that's part of the reason I asked my other question as well, is if there's room for new initiatives that may come along that don't fit perfectly into a strategy, will we have the opportunity to look at those? That's all.
Yeah, and maybe that makes sense for setting aside some funds for that, for future funding years. And I do just want to reiterate that the timeline doesn't change the dollar amount. So I know that's kind of confusing because generally speaking, with all of our other pillars, we were giving people 2 years, and in that they were giving 1 year of 2 years of funding, the same amounts for those each year. We're advocating for giving the amount. It doesn't mean they have to get the money up front, but they're being allocated an amount up front, but being allowed a longer period of time to spend it out. And I do think that that is different from the other pillars, in which the other pillars are providing services, and prevention work isn't done as like a service. It's done in a much large, it usually has we use this, it's called the strategic prevention framework, in which we do like assessment, and then we do planning, and then we do community engagement work, and then implementation and evaluation. So there's like a process to it that often takes a longer time cycle and has the need for different amounts of funding kind of at each cycle. And so we're sort of advocating for people to have longer, but not more money necessarily, unless the council decides we'd like to add the number of community coalitions. So then we add money to it, and more community coalitions can go through that process and do that work, as opposed to giving them longer time frames, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Paul. Oh, you're on mute, Paul.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. So thank you, Liz and Melissa, for this work. And as I look over the proposal, I just have a question. It looks like goal 1, you've got that kind of broken down into 3 pieces. And would would you recommend that we just direct those funds directly to organizations, or do we do what we did with the other pillars, and have organizations submit grant applications for all of those? And the question, it looks like for the second goal, you're going to have an RFP process, so people would apply for that money. And then it looks like the CDC one, we would just negotiate directly with CDC and not worry about grant applications. Do I have that correct?
You do, and you're right. I'm looking at this right now. And yes, the goal one is the same as goal two, in which we would have an RFP process. We just are recommending that we have HRA help us with that RFP process because um, the work of community coalitions is and drafting a RFP that meets the goals that they have is a little more complicated than the RFP process, say, we had for the other pillars. But you are correct. We want to do an RFP process for both goal one and goal two. And that goal three would essentially be a sole source contract with the Maine CDC.
Okay, great. Would what's the cost of the technical assistance with HRIA?
That is a great question, and they are sending me a budget right now.
Okay.
Like I should get it in like 2 days.
Okay.
And I think we can scale it up and down based on like kind of how much support we want from them, right? So I think they're going to give us the budget. I will send it out to you all. They said by the 6th. So you'll have a week to look at the budget and we can discuss that. And I think we'll make a motion that's separate. A separate motion. So we'll do a motion to support goal one for having an RFP for communal coalitions. And then we'll have a separate motion for doing a sole source contract to HRA for technical assistance and RFP support so that we can have that discussion about like, how do we all feel about this one and what do we want to do about it? And then we'll do a motion for goal two to have an RFP process for 2Gen, and then a motion for sole source to Maine CDC. But thank you for that question. And I don't know the answer to what the cost is, but I'll get it to you ASAP. Brendan.
Thanks, Liz. On the CDC portion, you may have already said this, and I'm sorry if I can't recall. It may make sense for you to just have a conversation with Ben Mann about the logistics and legalities of whether the CDC, how the CDC can agree to take on that work. I don't know enough about it myself. I'm happy to participate, but I think that's probably a conversation that would be helpful to have.
Okay, great. I do know that we did have the legislation so that money can be moved to the Maine
Right.
CDC.
Yeah, and that's another question whether that needs to be renewed. But the money and the ability to do the work or the authorization to do the work might be two separate things that I just don't know enough about.
Okay. Great. I will put that on a list to write in an email to Ben to maybe think about between now and the meeting. Thank you.
I just want to pause and say thank you to everybody for asking the questions and offering the feedback because it's just helping it make the proposal clear for the full council. So just really appreciate you all taking the time to go over this with us and offer feedback.
Any other questions or concerns or things people want to ask about? Great. Well, Melissa and I will also work on having motions that we can like kind of work through if we have, I think it's really helpful to have motions that we're then agreeing to or changing. So if that works, that was a great idea from Gordon to write them up ahead of time. So we will I think, did you send yours out, Gordon, in advance? Is that how did we get them out at the time of? He might not be able to answer this right now because he's on his phone. Does anybody know the answer to that?
I do believe it was sent out in advance.
And
Okay.
I think that's a great practice, Liz. I think that
Yeah.
Yeah,
would be, yeah.
totally. It's just Melissa and I are meeting on the 11th, so you might get it on the 11th. So I will try to get
You'll
them
get
out.
it before the meeting. That's our commitment.
Why? No, I mean, I want you to get, but at least luckily you all know what will be in the motion, but like we'll try hard to like make the motion very clear and we'll send them out ahead of time. And I will be in touch with Ben, try to be in touch with Ben Mann about the legality of Maine CDC doing the work.
And
Um,
and just to reiterate my drumbeat on FOA, I think sending out the motions ahead of time is all, is all good, but I encourage folks to not work proposals over email.
Great. We will send them out and you will just read them. And then we'll talk about them on the 13th. And if you have other questions or things that are unclear, please email just one of us. So there's not three of us on the email, but just email me and let me know so that we can keep working through making them as clear as possible. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Liz and Melissa. And I agree with Chastity. Really great. It's such a great body of work you guys did. So thank you. Um, okay, Mary, I don't know if it's been so long. Future funding opportunities. Is that really just a future funding conversation, or do we already have something in mind that we want to talk about with that agenda item?
A little bit of both.
Okay, great.
I have put that on the agenda, knowing that we had this urgent funding policy that was being discussed, and I believe will be voted on next week at the full council meeting. So I think if the committee would like an opportunity to discuss that in more detail, this would be a great time to do so. Um, in regards to that policy, I mean, I'm happy to pull it up too if that would be helpful. There wasn't anything specific that I wanted to discuss, but again, wanted to share, as I did at the beginning, some of the new information that I have around what our contracting timeline and process looks like and will continue to look like. And that we need to really just keep that in mind as we think about current and future funding opportunities. Um, the more I learn, I think the more I recognize that urgent funding may be a bit misleading, given just the time it does take for us to contract and actually disperse funds. Um, it's by no means a bad thing, but just something for, the committee and council to keep sort of top of mind as we do continue these discussions to make sure that we're clear on what our capabilities are and to keep those expectations sort of consistent and true. So that was the only thing I wanted to note. And again, Joe, I'll pass it back to you to open up for further discussion if that would be helpful.
Great. Todd.
Just in general, do we know if that opportunity has passed in Aroostook County, or is that still potentially doable?
Gordon may be on the phone, but it's still doable. And Paul may know more than me, but it's still on the table.
Yes, it is, Todd, it is doable. It's looking like it's going to start in 2026 instead of 2025. So that gives us a little more time, but the college needs a commitment very very soon in order to make that happen, in order to save that space for them. There was a article in the Maine Monitor Sunday, and I think it was repeated in the Press Herald on Monday, uh, regarding that school.
They did a blurb on one of the news stations too. I saw it. They highlighted the Maine Monitor. I don't know if it was WCSH or who it was, but
And so Todd, just in Pat, you may be going to recap this. Are you going to recap Pat kind of what, because Todd, I don't know, were you at think you were away last full council meeting, or maybe you left early. So there's the whole process. Pat, were you going to highlight that? Is that why your hands up? I'll pass it to you, and then we can.
Okay, um my comment was on the policy, if we're going to discuss the policy at all. And this is just a quirky little thing. The name of the policy is urgent funding. If you haven't known anything else other than the 2 years I've been in the council, nothing we do is quick. And so even if we wanted to do it quick, we can't do it quick. So I'm not saying that the policy in itself isn't good, but I think the labeling of it is an urgent policy. I'm not sure what that means to the general public. And it's a silly observation on my part, and I don't mean to be picky, but I don't want people to think if we've learned anything else, as much as we would like to operate and get money out quickly, the way the statute works and the way the procedures we have to go through, if you need money urgently, it's not going to come from this council. It just can't. It's 3 months, 4 months down the line, that's it. So it's just the name of it that's there that I just want to look at, as well as, going through the entire policy or at least comments here. But I don't want the name to be misleading to the public to think that, and again, we know that this is not good times for people. Funding, federal grants are all of a sudden not being, distributed. There's all sorts of things going on within the state and in the federal. And so I don't want people to think that this is a policy that can help them in an emergency to keep their doors open, because I'm not sure that's what this is. But that's my only piece. And again, I don't mean to be picky. If you want to keep the name, that's fine. It's just that it sort of leads to a different place than I think the funding is for.
Thanks, Pat. So I just want to remind the group, Todd, what I was starting to say is that we agreed at the council meeting that we wouldn't talk about the recovery school at this meeting, that we needed to approve the policy first. So I'm sorry if I took us in a rabbit hole, but that's what's happening. So I think, Mary, today we just want to take a final look at that policy that will go back to the council, and then I think that the council meeting will discuss the recovery school.
Thanks.
Yes. Yep.
Thanks, Joe. I did miss that at the last meeting, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, and it would be, so yeah, so I just want to make sure we're all kind of on the same page with that. And Paul.
Pat, I agree with you that the name could be misleading. And something that I was thinking maybe could call it unscheduled or off schedule funding requests.
Yeah, give funding request outside of the grant cycle.
Oh, there we go. Just blurt it out exactly what it is. I like that.
So go ahead, Todd.
Sorry, I should know this probably, but did I miss anything else at the last meeting? I did have to leave early from the Recovery Council meeting. Has the policy changed, the wording, since the draft we looked at the meeting?
I think so. Mary, can you pull a policy up?
Yeah, one moment. Todd, I believe it changed. There were some slight modifications, and I believe those were addressed at our last Program and Grants Committee meeting. Which, yeah, let me pull it up one moment.
Todd, thank you for saying that, because I was just scrambling through my email trying to find the draft. So
I think the original draft may be on the website.
Don't doubt that it is, but maybe it's just me and you too, Pat, with computers. It's like I was looking at the website before I came here to try to get as much information as I could find. I could find the agenda and stuff, but other than that, I'm sure it's there. I just wasn't able to get to it.
Todd, you and I. Mary, can you make that just a slightly larger? I'm having cataract surgery soon, so this is like impossible for me to say.
How does that better at all? Um, I also want to note that Brendan did share a couple comments and suggested changes with Pat and I recently, and those are not incorporated in this version, but I will be sure to incorporate those suggestions in the draft that's shared with the council for next week's meeting.
And so the way this reads is this is only for applicants that were in this round of scoring, and that this policy expires on the 31st of December. So it's only for programs that may have not, well, they aren't. They're for programs that are not that we originally had funded.
My question is to what you just said, Pat. So is this gonna have to be renewed every year, or can we change the language again? So that way it says after each funding cycle for that calendar year, this is applied. I'm not a lawyer to get the right wording, but so that way this doesn't have to be redone every single year. That just feels like extra tedious work that maybe we don't need to do.
Joe, I don't know if you can see Todd has his hand up.
Go ahead, Todd. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just curious, in section 3 there, in considering the council shall consider, what does that mean? Are those two if is that intended to mean that if the matter doesn't fit both of those categories, it wouldn't move forward, or is that considered literally interpreted as we just need to consider it? I'm not sure what the intent was there. And I don't think I don't know if Gordon can hear us or not, but
I can hear you. That's about all. I'm trying to just go out to the line in the airport, so it's a little hard, but I can hear you.
Gordon, did you hear his question about section 3? I'm not sure that you can speak to it without.
again, Joe, my question really is just I'm just curious, if our intent is to allow for some flexibility should a pressing matter come up that the council as a whole agrees should be addressed. Probably A qualifies, but there may be situations there in subsection B that what if it's what if it's urgent and the council agrees that it's urgent, but it doesn't fall into one of those two categories? Maybe it's a project in the southern part of the state or a populated area. I don't know what that project would be. I'm just trying not to I understand what it's trying to do. I don't disagree. I'm just wondering about where that leaves us.
Yeah, and go ahead, Brendan, then Pat.
Just in terms of process, if the council is going to be considering, and I don't mean to suggest you shouldn't have any conversations now, but if the council is going to be considering the policy at its next meeting, do you want to have all those conversations in one place? Just a thought.
Pat, I'll let you.
So I think, Brendan, it's a twofold. I think we just sort of wanted to flush this out with the programs and grants before it went before the full council to have questions. I think that was the intent, just to sort of, walk through it to see if we could see anything that we wanted to elaborate on a little bit more or change a little, and then the conversation with the full council to vote on it. I understand, I think, what Todd is saying. But I think what we were trying to do, and I could be wrong with this policy, was really look at um, applicants that didn't make the first round who really did serve a special population or geographic area that may have fallen into a gap. And I think that's what this was looking for, that again, if there was some sort of special circumstance that now came up, and most of them would fall within these two areas, A or B and three. And I think that was the intent, but that could be just my interpretation.
I don't know. I thought that's what she said. But that woman says somewhere there's a second.
Melissa.
I love being with Gordon in the airport right now. Yeah, I mean, I think I appreciate what's being lifted up, and I also support what Brendan's saying. Like, I think it's good for us to brainstorm and then bring these same conversations to the full council. There's a difference between and or, and what consider means. So to me, I'm actually on the and versus the like. Is it and or is it or? Right? Does it need to meet both of those criteria, or is it one or the other? And I do think that we were trying to put my recollection of the conversation was some parameters on it so that it isn't just another cycle of funding for people that didn't get funded the first time. It's like, what would be a special circumstance that would create a reconsideration? That's just what I remember that I would offer to the group to think about.
Thanks. Brendan, then Paul.
One of the suggested edits that I had made in this section is to sort of flesh out whether the council, the extent to which the council wanted these criteria to be, driving the decision. One approach could be that the council, and the way I interpreted it, one approach could be that the council shall require at least the following criteria be demonstrated. Yeah, Mary's pulling up my edits now. So you'll be able to see it's now section 4. A potential edit you could make is in section 4, the council shall require, not just consider, but require at least the following criteria be demonstrated. And then A and B have an and, so you need to meet them both. And maybe there's a better way to write it, but as I understood as I was sort of hearing the council's interest, they wanted both to be present, and they wanted them to be they wanted there to be actual evidence of these things. So I just offer that as a suggestion.
Thank you, Brendan. Paul, no, we can't hear you, Paul.
I wanted to go back to what Chastity talked about, how we would have to renew this every time. And Mary, can you go to the top, please? Um, I wonder if we could change it to any applicant may petition the council for reconsideration for applications submitted to the council during the grant application process and scoring above average, and never mind putting in the year. I think Gordon's trying to figure out his seat right now. Or maybe he's arguing about his luggage.
Yeah. Okay, Todd, and then Brendan. I'm not sure if you're. Go ahead, Todd.
Just Brendan, where I was thinking is I is it possible to put like a purpose statement? Because I think this should be, I think our intent is, or at least my thought is that this should be the exception, not the norm. And so the purpose of it, could it be spelled out more in the purpose? This is more of an urgent situation that still is going to require three council members to bring it forward, and then the full council discussion and process. Um, and and using the example of where I still get tied up in section 4 there is using the example of what we just went through in Piscataquis County, right? So that would probably reach the geographic area, that purchase, right? But if I don't know what the project would be, but a project in a more populated area that was still had a time frame and was something that we were committed in, as long as it meets the purpose of the policy, why would we further tie our hands? Is it if you follow what I'm trying to say? Um, anyway,
Do you?
I'll let it go at that. So
I was going to suggest if you wanted to try to write that up, we could take a look at it.
I love that idea of the purpose statement above it.
Yeah, I do.
Definitely.
Can tell you what.
Brendan.
Just responding to Paul's suggestion, all of that sounds fine, although I note that in future, council grant cycles, it, the council may set a different cutoff point. It may be that the council wants to consider applications that are like, scoring at 60% or 70%. So I just point out that the council may want to establish a scoring threshold for applications to qualify for this process. Or it could just be that the council wants to consider that as part of its review of any application. But I agree with Chastity. Like if there's a way to not have this tied to a particular grant application cycle, that would be ideal.
I too agree with Chastity, and I'm struggling a bit with 4A and B. If I think of milestone as an example, and we had appropriated money for detox and we kind of repurposed it, but I'm not sure that they met 4B. So I'm a little lost with 4B. Like I like it, but it's not, Pat, to what you said, it kind of makes the policy not urgent anymore. A is what makes it urgent, and I'm not campaigning. It's just I think it's sort of that's the decision. Is it sort of an off grant cycle, which I like that simplicity of that. Or if it's really urgent, then it's 4A. As I think of the milestone situation.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Mary, do you want to take a stab, and maybe Todd, if he has wisdom around the purpose statement and any other edits, and Gordon?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. More
Sorry,
technical problems.
especially for the past like 10 minutes. And can no longer detect my camera. Certainly take a stab at the edits you all have.
Yeah, and then I think everyone likes the idea of a purpose statement too.
Great.
Mary, if it helps, I've already started that and I'll
Oh,
send,
perfect.
I'm sure it'll have to be changed, and I certainly would want to reach out to Gordon, so you don't have to spend a lot of time on it. I was just thinking of a couple of sentences.
Yeah,
Perfect.
that would be great. Thank you, Todd.
Joe, I just want to clarify. I think what you were proposing is that we also consider whether we need 4A and 4B or if it's just 4A. Am I capturing that correctly?
Well, and it wasn't like I wasn't really opining about that as much as that is it an urgent policy to poor
Right.
Pat was like is it do we remove that and sort of go with a more general off grant cycle request, and I'm not using the right language. So that's where that was my thought, Melissa.
Okay.
Can I just make one more point? I apologize. I just note that the council had made a decision some time ago to not have an appeal process of its grant making. And it's the more generalized this becomes, the more it becomes an appeal process. Because people would be asking for reconsideration of funding they didn't get. So I think that's just something to be mindful of as the council considers it.
And I mean, I really, really love the idea of urgency because I think, being here representing providers, that's our reality. But as Pat and Mary mentioned, we're not very capable of being urgent or having a sense of urgency. But I think we all liked what we did for Milestone, so
What we
that was
did for
really,
Milestone was a miracle. Yeah.
yes,
Oh,
it
yeah.
was. And that being that having that somewhat flexibility was really great.
I
But
mean,
I
I
think,
do think and Mary could correct me on this, but I do think over time, the council's process will and is speeding up, and at least the sort of deadlines that the council needs to meet is there's got to be a council meeting to make a decision to award funding to somebody. Then there's got to be the contract drafting. Then it's got to be turned into our office 2 weeks, I think, before it's got to be turned into the vendor for signature, and then it's got to come to to Pat for signature. It's going to be turned into our office for signature 2 weeks before the contract start date, at least. And then additional work happens in our office, and then it goes to another office. So there's sort of, even if the council's work speeds up, there's sort of a guaranteed like 4 to 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks.
I also want to recognize, Brendan, to your point, that there is a process that takes time, no matter how we slice it. And we also need to ensure that we have enough funding available for us to actually spend. And that's something that we need to, keep in mind and throughout this process. And that's something that, I can work with the Attorney General's office early on to try to ensure that we have the funding available. But there could be a situation in which we approve a large amount of money, like with milestones being over $1 million, and not actually have that available in our account at that point in time, and would have to wait until the next financial order. Again, I'm not anticipating that will happen, but I do just want to call that out in terms of expectations around the timeline and just what has to happen, on our side of things after the award is made.
so I think where we're at, Mary will make some edits and it'll make its way back to the council meeting.
Yes, that sounds great.
Anything else, Mary, in this future funding?
No, not on my end. I'm glad we were able to have that discussion and make those recommended changes. So thank you for the productive and informative. But otherwise, nothing on my end.
So I think we are getting to the end. So is there any other business? I know. It's like, who are we?
Whoa, who is this group?
Don't jinx it, guys.
No way, Joe. No.
I know. Like, any other business for the group? And I think to Mary and I think we do want to talk about, programming ideas, possible guests. We want to learn. And we do probably want to think about funding, but I think our brains are so tied up with sort of process and what we have on the table right now that might not be the best time to dive into that. But I think in the future. But Mary, anything for the next meeting in 2 weeks? I know Grayson's going to need the agenda.
Ooh, our new coordinator will be on board then, right, Mary?
Yes, she will be on board, which will be wonderful. I would, Joe, like to keep a little bit of time kind of reserved or set aside for contract related needs. Again, as those come up, it's nice to have this committee to have those discussions with and make sure if we do need any kind of final discussions or votes, we can do that. But otherwise, I do wonder if the committee wants to start thinking about other funding opportunities, discussions, outside of the realm of what we have going on currently. Acknowledging that our focus is still on contracts and finishing up this most recent grant cycle. But I can tell you that I started to receive many, many messages from folks around future funding opportunities for the council. Especially with all the uncertainty and unknowns right now. At the federal level, they're curious about what type of support the council may be able to offer in the future. So that may be a discussion that this committee can start, sooner rather than later.
Great. Chastity, then Melissa.
It's not our committee, but um, can we get some information from finance so that'll really inform us having those conversations in the coming months about what we want to start looking at without knowing what the money looks like? It's hard to really think about what we're going to do and what we want to do. Or ask Ben to join us, something.
Yeah, Chesney, my hope is to have a budget to share with the council at the next meeting. And if I can get that at least as up to date as possible before then, and get a little bit of Ben's time, then I'll be able to share the information I know. But yes, and I can also extend the invite to Ben to join us if there are specific discussions, down the road. But I'll definitely do that because I recognize we can't really make informed decisions until we know how much money we have to allocate.
Great, thanks. Melissa.
I'll keep it really quick and just say +1 to what Chastity just shared. That's what I was going to ask as well, that I think it'd be great to start thinking about additional funding opportunities, but it feels like we're flying blind without a finance update. So just would also underscore that would be very helpful sooner than later.
Great. So I think, Mary, the agenda will look a lot like today's agenda. We'll keep it that flexible. And then I think, I'd love to sort of, Mary, once you get your new colleague, just sort of like beginning to think about what we funded, what are gaps, like what else what do we think? So if we could be thinking about that. And Mary, unfortunately, you hold a lot of that in your head, from it being so immersed with the contracts
Yeah. Oh
and
yeah.
all the applications. But again, if we could talk it through, we could at least capture that, in the written word.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, perhaps the starting point for us next time would be to review, the applications of what were funded, and looking at how those fall in terms of, geographic landscapes and types of projects, and whatnot. And then I also have, information from what seems like forever ago with Dr. Johnson and those gaps and needs that were identified. So I'm happy to bring that back to the committee and we can look at that as a starting point and then discussions from there.
Sounds great. And Melissa and Liz, in terms of prevention, will that at that point just be under the contract section? Or do you still want to have a section of a standalone section about prevention in this meeting?
I think Liz had to step away. I think I hope that we could be in the contract placeholder phase of that.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll remember it. We will move you there, but we'll know if something else comes up. Oh, there's Liz.
Liz, feel welcome to overrule me.
Sorry, what did I miss? I had to step away. I'm so sorry.
We're talking about the next agenda, Liz, and I asked you and Melissa if you want to have a placeholder again for prevention, or will you want to be just in the contract update section of the meeting?
Of this meeting, program
Of
and
this
program and
meeting.
grants.
Yeah.
What did you say, Melissa?
I said I hope we can be in contracts and updates by then.
Yeah, let's hope for that.
Yeah, so I think we hope for that, and then we can whatever we need to do. Um, so I think that's our next agenda, and it's 4:24, folks. This is very exciting.
There we go. Don't question it,
I
Joe.
mean, and it's bright and
Don't
light
question.
outside. I mean, we're not here till 7 o'clock. So yeah, very good.
Don't
Very
question the
good.
purpose.
Any other thoughts before we wrap up? Thank you, everyone, so much. Good meeting. Bye-bye.
Nice meeting. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.